So, mic's on. She'll go live and as soon as I say we're ready.
Okay.
So now hang tight. Let's go. Sorry. What's wrong with this?
Should I? Okay.
That's for, so the place.
Right. So for within the Arabic khutbah.
So yeah, I think you don't have to look into it.
Okay.
Then there's an audience.
Okay.
And you're set. Sana, is you ready to go? So we have, I think, 30 seconds. Actually, he's going to start, okay? Bismillah.
الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على من لا نبي بعده ولا أمة بعد أمته ولا كتاب بعد كتابه ولا شريعة بعد شريعته ولا صحابة بعد صحابته أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم إن زلزلة الساعة شيء عظيم وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم لو أن لابن آدم واديا من ذهب لأحب أن يكون له واديان وبقول حضرت محمد اقبال لاهوری چونی دور آسمان که کم دیده باشد که جبریل امین را دل خراشد چه خوش دیری بنا کردند آنجا که پرستد مؤمن و کافر تراشد مسلمان فقیر کجگلاه رمید از سینه او سوز آه دلش نالد چرا نالد نداند نگاه یا رسول الله نگاه یا رسول الله علیه الصلاة والسلام. There's not really anyone in front of me, so it's kind of weird for me to speak, but kind of feels like I'm just speaking into a void. What I wanted to talk about today was this idea of history in Islam and what is so important, what is so critical about history in Islam. And to me, probably the greatest Muslim historian of the past 20th century is Muhammad Iqbal Lahori, who not only was a historian, but he was kana sha'ir, kana faylasuf, he was a poet, he was a philosopher, born in Sialkot, passed away in Lahore. And one of the most sort of tear-jerking couplets that I think that Iqbal Lahori says, he says in Farsi, Musalman sharamsar az be gilahist, tu dani ke dar jahan tu ra sima chist, qalimi az qumashe padshahist. That he says that Musalman sharamsar az be gilahist, that the Muslim has become ashamed, almost devastatingly so, of losing their sort of crown, of losing their political sovereignty over the world. And we have to remember that Iqbal, he was born in the year 1882. The last Mughal king, Bahadur Shah Zafar, right? This Mughal dynasty that started with Muhammad Zahiruddin Babar, right? To Humayun, to Akbar, to Jahangir, to Shah Jahan, to Aurangzeb, to Bahadur Shah Awal, to Shah Alam, to Rafi' al-Shan. All of these Mughal kings from 1530 to 1857, right? That when Babur came into India, I was actually just in Uzbekistan a couple of weeks ago. I sort of went to go explore the first Mughal king's homeland, right? This culture that gave us Urdu, that gave us Islam. You know, when Babur came into South Asia or Tarihi Hindustan or historical India, Muslims were only about 4 to 5%. Irfan Habib, who is a Marxist historian at Aligarh University, has a long book about the statistics of Muslims in India before the Mughals and after the Mughals. And it's a really brilliant sort of insight to me to think about, right? When Babur comes into India from, now, you know, I just went to his hometown, it's on the border of China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, and he flees down into Afghanistan, and then he comes into Punjab, and then he takes Delhi in 1526, right? And Muslims by then are only 5% of the population of the entire, from Peshawar to Dhaka to Chittagong to Sylhet to what is modern day Assam, right? But yet by partition, by 1947, right, when the Governor General of India, Lord Mountbatten, right, commands Cyrus Radcliffe to sort of draw lines between India and Pakistan, right? Then Muslims are about 37, 38%, a majority only in Punjab, Baluchistan, Bengal, Kashmir, and Sindh, right? So how does this happen, right? Where Muslims now have become a majority in many regions throughout India in just about 200 to 300 years of Mughal rule, from Babur to Bahadur Shah Zafar. And we know how he was exiled to Burma, right? The British took him and literally walked him from Delhi, from the Khuni Darwaza of Delhi, of Purana Delhi, all the way through Awadh, through Lucknow, through through Allahabad, and then through Bihar, and then to Bengal, through Calcutta, and then to Burma, right? Because of what the Mughal king symbolized to all Muslim Indians, right? And at that time, there was no Pakistan, it was just India. And so when Iqbal is born, just about 3 years after Bahadur Shah Zafar's passing, he says, Musalman sharamsar as begilahis, that Muslims have become ashamed, right, of losing their sort of status in this world. Tu dani ki dar jahan turasi ma cheest. That do you know what the Muslim today has inherited? Turasi ma cheest. Yani hamari turath kya hai? Iqbal asks. Tu dani ki dar jahan turasi ma cheest, qalimi az qumashe padshahist. That Iqbal rote hue Lahore mein, he says that what? Qalimi az qumashe padshahist. That all Muslims have is this blanket. In Farsi, in Iranian Farsi, qumash, or rather qalim, was a sort of qaleen, right? It was a sort of blanket or this carpet, right? As qumash padshahist. He says that all Muslims have to show, right? 800 saal Musalmani hukumat dar Hindustan. What do Muslims have to show for it? Qalimi as qumash padshahist. Just a small blanket made of silk to show that we were from kings, right? But what Iqbal is more asking Muslims to do when they study their history, right, is that when you open Imam Ghazali's Al-Munqidh min al-Dalala, Ihya Ulum al-Din, or Ibn Arabi's Futuhat Makkiyah, right, Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddim or Kitab al-Ibar, right, all of these books, right, of the Islamic civilization that stretched from West Africa to India. Unfortunately, many Muslims today, when they think about the Islamic past or quote unquote al-ayyam al-dhahabiyya, the quote unquote golden days, right, is that they think that the Islamic past is just Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina, right? I mean, what about all of the poets? What about all of the historians? What about all of the artisans? Mi'mar Sinan, as Iqbal says, Faryad Afrang, Delavezi Afrang, Faryad Shirini o Parvezi Afrang, Alam Hama Virana as Changezi Afrang, Ay Mi'mar Haram, Baz Batamir Jahan Khayz, as Khabe Garan Khayz, as Khabe Garan Khayz. Ay Mi'mar Haram. Mi'mar, so Iqbal says this in Farsi, most of his poetry is in Farsi. Ay Mi'mar Haram, Baz Batamir Jahan Khayz. O architect of the dunya, Baz Batamir Jahan Khayz. Phir se aao, come and rebuild the world. As khabe garan khayz, wake up from your deep sleep, right? For us as Muslims to explore, to study, and to analyze our past, and to simply reduce it, or to chalk it down to only just science, right, or math. Not to say that those are not important, but to think about the humanities, the social sciences tradition of Islam, right? That Mughal poet, if you think about Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib, Mir Taqi Mir, Abdul Qadir Bidil, right? Who even know these names anymore, right? Who can even recite a couplet, right? From these great poets. In 1-2 generations, we've lost that, right? How many people can read Urdu today, right? 1-2 generations ago, reading Urdu was incredibly easy. How many? What is that famous Urdu couplet from the 17th century from Firaq? It's escaping my mind now, right? He's sort of talking about the literary brilliance of Urdu and why Urdu replaces Farsi, right? In Mughal India, right? And to think about how important language is for Islamic civilization, and that Muslims, I mean, we know Shah Waliullah, probably the greatest Mughal scholar after Mujaddid al-Fasani, Ahmad Sarhindi Rabbani, radiallahu an. You can see the syllabi of Shah Waliullah, of these great Mughal scholars, how many years they would study just Arabic and mantiq, just Arabic and logic. Imagine in Delhi in the 1760s, spending 8 years just studying Arabic and mantiq, just studying grammar, right? And that's why you see the quality of their work. I mean, who studies grammar today, right? If I ask someone, what's the difference between a preposition and a predicate, even in English, let alone, Arabic, right? That our civilization was really a civilization of grammar. When you ask, your grandparents, right? How much Urdu grammar did they study, right? They could tell you the differences between a postposition, a preposition in Urdu, the mu'annath and the mudhakkar stances of different words in Urdu, right? The average many languages that most Muslims in India knew was about 4, right? They knew Urdu, they knew Arabic, they knew Farsi, and they knew their local dialect, which was either Dakkani or Braj Bhasha or Marathi or Bangla or Punjabi or Gujarati, etc. Right? Today, people can barely speak one, right? And this was one of the mu'ajizat. Badah dasta yaqeenai dil badasta shahi jilani ke dasta oo بود andar haqiqat dasta yazdani. The great Punjabi Mughal poet Shah Niazi sings in Farsi, right? That the fact that Muslim India, right? And again, when I say Muslim India, I mean Tarihi India, historical India, from Peshawar until Dhaka, produced more Farsi poets, right, than the countries of Iran and Afghanistan and Tajikistan and Central Asia, the larger Ma'wara al-Nahr and Khurasan and Khwarizm, right? All of these different Muslim historical regions. How did that happen, right? Coming back to thinking about Iqbal as a historian, thinking about Iqbal as someone who is living during the era of British colonialism, right? We know the British came in 1765. The first Muslim country that the Europeans colonized was Muslim India, right? Egypt came in 1798 when Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Alexandria, right? Because Alexandria is on the ala Sati al-Bahr, and then he came into Cairo, right? And then he went up to Jaffa in Palestine, and then he took Jaffa. So he took Alexandria, took Cairo, took Jaffa, and then he was stopped in Akka, which is, today we say Acre, right? But in Arabic, it's Akka. It's right ala Shati al-Bahr. But thinking about why did they come, right? And what did they do there? What did we lose, right? During British colonialism within our period, right? And one of the first things was language, right? In 1832, the British passed an act called the Minute Macaulay Act. Macaulay was the Minister of Education in British India. And what he said was incredibly troubling, where he said that one shelf of British literature, whether that was John Milton or Shakespeare or Voltaire or Montesquieu, or rather Western literature, was more valuable than an entire library of Indian Muslim literature, right? I mean, like, you can see the chauvinism and the sort of almost the literary racism that is contained in that statement, right? And in that, right, when Persian is replaced with English, how much is lost, right? How many ulama no longer can speak that language, a foreign language that was violently imposed upon them, right? And then now, Muslims now then refuse to study their own past, right? Tens and thousands of books that were written by South Asian Muslims. The average Muslim Indian Pakistani cannot read that today, cannot access it, right? You ask them even, let alone Farsi, you ask them to read Urdu, and that capacity is not even there, right? And how much is lost when language is lost, right? And thinking about how our miracle of Islam is a linguistic miracle, right? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say on the first page of Surah Yusuf, on the third page of Surah Ra'd, right? On the first page of Surah Fussilat. I can keep going. Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyya. Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyya. وَهَذَا كِتَابٌ. What is it on the fourth page of Surah Ahqaf, on the fourth lane, on the left-hand side of the page? وَهَذَا كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مُبَارَكٌ هُدًى. Right? All of these different ayat that point to the linguistic nature of the Qur'an. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say on the 24th page of Surah Baqarah? قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Right? بَلَا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ فله أجره عند ربه ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing to the mu'jizana nature of the Quran, the miraculous nature of the Quran, and that happens through language. That happens through being a master of language. Right? How many poets did Islamic civilization produce? Right? How many Muslim poets do you see today? Do you even place a value on poetry? Right? We had this idea of the ثقافة مشاعرة, right? The mushaira culture within South Asia, right? Where people focused and studied and analyzed language that gave them not only just a better understanding of their society or their environment, but also of the Quran, of their tradition, right? Much of becoming an alim or becoming a scholar is about studying language, right? And once that is lost, that's why Iqbal says, agar che urdu shakkar ast, tarz guftari farsi shirin tar ast. Or ba khuda dar pard goyam ba tu goyam ashkara ya Rasulallah u pinha tu paydai man. Ba khuda dar pard goyam. He says that I speak to Allah ba khuda dar pard goyam. That I speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside a veil. Ba tu goyam ashkara. O Prophet of Allah, I speak to you openly. Ba khuda dar pard goyam ba tu goyam ashkara ya Rasulallah u pinha tu paydai man. That, O Prophet of God, Allah it's hard for me to ascertain the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you, O Prophet of God, you're open to me. All Musalman faqir kaj gulahe, that a Muslim was a king and a Sufi so high. Ramid as-sinai sawza'ahe, that the flame in his chest has now burnt out, right? That flame that pushed him to do badashahi and faqiri, right? Badashahi me faqiri and faqiri me badashahi, right? This was our sort of mantra, right? Dilash nalad, chura nalad, nadanad. His heart often weeps. Nadanad, he doesn't know why. Nigahi ya Rasulallah, nigahi ya Rasulallah. A glance, O Prophet of God, a glance, O Prophet of God. Chuni, one of Iqbal's last couplets was, سرود رفته باز آید که نآید، نسیمی از حجاز آید که نآید، سر آمد روزگار این فقیری، دیگر دانای راز آید که نآید. That will the old song of Islam ever come back? Will the Nasimi as Hijaz, will the cold breeze from Hijaz where Mecca and Medina is, will that ever return? Sar Ahmad Rozgari in Faqiri, the time for the Sufi has come to go. Digar danai raz ayad kana ayad. Will another keeper of secrets come, right? Someone who can synthesize the many different branches of Islam, right? Not just fiqh and hadith and tafsir, but also other branches as well. Not to say that those are not important, but poetry, literature, art, all of these things that Muslims excelled in which you can see, right? You know, I was just in Samarkand and Bukhara just a couple of weeks ago in Tarmez, right? And you see the precedent, right, of South Asian Muslim civilization that has now, as Iqbal said, دقار دانا إيراز آيات كنا آيات. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين واستغفر إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Is someone going to give us on?
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله والله عليم حكيم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على من لا نبي بعده ولا أمة بعد أمته ولا كتاب بعد كتابه ولا شريعة بعد شريعته ولا صحابة بعد صحابته ولا أهل بيت بعد أهل بيته. وقال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم إن زلزلة الساعة شيء عظيم يوم ترونها تذهل كل مرضعة عما أرضعت وتضع كل ذات حمل حملها وترى الناس سكارى وما هم بسكارى ولكن عذاب الله شديد. وقال الله تعالى في مقام آخر إنا أنزلناه قرآنا عربيا لعلكم تعقلون. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم لو أن لابن آدم واديا من ذهب لأحب أن يكون له واديان. وقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام في أثر آخر كان زكريا عليه السلام نجارا. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات وذكر الحكيم. إنه تعالى جواد كريم ملك بر رؤوف رحيم ورب حليم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة. من يطع الله ورسوله فقد رشد ومن يعص الله ورسوله فقد ضل وغوى. وقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر وأشدهم في أمر الله عمر وأصدقهم حياء عثمان وأقضاهم علي رضوان الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين. وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله. اللهم اغفر للعباس وولده مغفرة ظاهرة وباطنة لا تغادر ذنبا. الله في أصحابي لا تتخذوهم غرضا من بعدي فمن أحبهم فبحبي أحبهم ومن أبغضهم فببغضي أبغضهم. وخير أمتي قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. اللهم انصر المسلمين في كل مكان. اللهم انصر المسلمين في كل زمان. اللهم عليك أعداء الدين. اللهم عليك أعداء الدين. يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على طاعتك. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله تعالى أعلى وأولى وأعز وأجل وأهم وأتم وأكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. أقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Unless you're related.
الله أكبر. لا إله خير الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين وجاهدوا في الله حق جهاده هو اجتباكم وما جعل عليكم في الدين من حرج ملة أبيكم إبراهيم هو سماكم المسلمين من قبل وفي هذا ليكون الرسول شهيدا عليكم وتكونوا شهداء على الناس فأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة واعتصموا بالله هو مولاكم فنعم المولى ونعم النصير. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والنجم إذا هوى ما ضل صاحبكم وما غوى وما ينطق عن الهوى إن هو إلا وحي يوحى علمه شديد القوى ذو مرة فاستوى وهو بالأفق الأعلى ثم دنا فتدلى فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى فأوحى إلى عبده ما أوحى ما كذب الفؤاد ما رأى أفتمارونه على ما يرى ولقد رآه نزلة أخرى عند سدرة المنتهى عندها جنة المأوى إذ يغشى السدرة ما يغشى ما زاغ البصر وما طغى. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. التحيات لله والصلاة والسلام على محمد عبده ورسوله وصلى على محمد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وقنا عذاب الدنيا وعافنا وصلنا السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا وسندنا ورسولنا وحبيبنا ومحبوبنا ومقصودنا ومنظومنا محمد وعلى آله الذين قاموا بنصرة الدين القويم، وعلى صحبه الذين هم آووا برسول الكريم. اللهم صل على جميع الملائكة والمرسلين، فارحم عبادك المؤمنين من أهل السماوات والأرضين. اللهم إنا نسألك من خير ما سألك منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، ونعوذ بك من شر ما استعاذ منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. أنت المستعان وعليك البلاغ، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا وسندنا ورسولنا وحبيبنا ومحبوبنا ومقصودنا ومنظومنا محمد برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله.
إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله والله عليم حكيم.